She abandoned her final delivery in the pounding rain to save a dying stranger. The elderly woman she rescued turned out to be the mother of a notorious mafia boss. Now he considers her family, and in his world, family means everything. Rain lashed against Rachel Morgan's face, like needles of ice as she kept her head down, hurrying along the slick sidewalk. At 29, she trembled from the cold, her fingers gripping the strap of the soaked delivery bag that held a Cajun-style meal meant to be dropped off 20 minutes ago. Her phone vibrated inside her jacket. One more order. The screen read. And she would meet her nightly quota, 30 minutes until midnight. If she finished, she could cover the remainder of her electric bill. If she didn't, the app would flag her for a late delivery for the second time that month, and one more strike meant her account would be locked. That would be the end. She turned onto an old industrial street on the edge of downtown Philadelphia, where moss-covered brick warehouses stood among flickering shopfronts that refused to close despite the storm. Tips were rare in this neighborhood, especially on a night like this. Her sneakers were soaked through, each step sending a chill up from her toes to her ankles. When she crossed Sycamore Street, she stopped. Beneath the sickly yellow streetlight sat a lone figure on the bus stop bench, an elderly woman slumped forward, one hand clutching her chest, the other trembling weakly into the empty air. No one else was around. The rain beat mercilessly on her thin, silver hair. Her floral dress clung to her frail body, her bare legs drawn tight from the cold. Her lips, tinged with blue, moved soundlessly. Rachel froze for a moment, hesitation curling inside her. She glanced at her phone. The next delivery was 15 minutes away. She had to be on time. Another flag and she'd lose the job she depended on. 3 months behind on rent. Credit maxed out. Fridge empty. But then the woman's hand slipped, her body tilting as if she were about to collapse completely. Rachel clenched her teeth. "Damn it," she muttered, then sprinted toward the bus stop, dropped the food bag aside, and knelt beside the stranger. Up close. The woman's lips were almost purple, her breath so faint it was barely visible. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Rachel's voice shook. Clouded brown eyes fluttered open for a second, filled with pain and fear. One word escaped them, barely audible. "Help." Rachel's fingers trembled as she pulled out her phone and called 911, her voice spilling the address. The symptoms. The fragments she remembered from a first aid class 3 years ago. She's breathing weakly, lips blue, pulse fading. "I think it's her heart." "Please hurry." Her voice broke. The operator asked, "Do you know CPR?" Rachel nodded, though no one could see. "Yes, a long time ago. If she stops breathing, start compressions immediately. Keep her conscious if you can." The call ended. Rachel gripped the woman's hand. "Stay with me. Please. The ambulance is on its way. You have to stay." The woman's eyes opened one last time. A frail flicker of awareness. And she mouthed something that felt like "thank you" before her body went still. Rachel screamed silently inside. "No, not like this. Not in front of me." She pressed her ear to the woman's chest. No heartbeat. No breath. The rain came harder. Furious. Rachel tilted the woman's head back, pinched her nose, and gave 2 breaths. Then she set her hands on the fragile chest and began compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. Rain poured over her face, soaked her lash, her sleeves, everything. She didn't stop. 12, 13, 14. Wind howled in her ears. She counted. She pressed. She breathed. And she whispered over and over, "Don't go. Please don't go." In the distance, sirens rose sharp, slicing through the storm. Rachel kept going until a hand rested on her shoulder. "Miss, let us take over." Paramedics surrounded them. One fitting an oxygen mask, another readying the defibrillator. Rachel staggered back, collapsing onto the cold metal bench, her body trembling uncontrollably. "Are you family?" one of them asked. She shook her head. "No. I saw her." The older medic gave a small nod. "You may have saved her life. You did good." They lifted the woman onto a stretcher and prepared to close the ambulance doors. Rachel heard herself say, Can I ride with her? She's alone." The medic looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Get in." Rachel stepped into the ambulance, leaving behind the cooling food bag, the blinking phone alerting another late delivery, and everything from the life she didn't yet realize would never be the same again. The ambulance turned sharply through the drenched streets, red lights flashing across the puddles that mirrored the stormy night. Rachel sat huddled on the rear bench, arms wrapped tightly around herself, eyes fixed on the still figure lying on the stretcher. The old woman was wrapped in a silver emergency blanket, an oxygen mask covering most of her small, time-worn face. One medic was checking her blood pressure, while the other spoke rapidly into a phone, relaying the patient's condition to the hospital. The sound of sirens tangled with the rain, turning the air into a kind of fever dream. Rachel's arms throbbed from the long minutes of chest compressions. Her knees burned from kneeling on cold concrete. She still couldn't understand what had made her stay, when every rational thought told her to keep going to finish the delivery. To think about her job, her nearly empty bank account, the last warning from the app. But when the old woman's eyes had fluttered open, when those cracked lips had formed the word help, everything else had fallen away. In that moment, she wasn't a delivery driver fighting to survive another night. She was simply a human being standing between life and death. The scene replayed in her mind, every second of it, the phone slipping in her shaking hand as she dialed 911, the way she had held her jacket above the woman to shield her from the rain, though she herself was drenched to the bone. When the operator asked if she knew CPR, she had heard her own voice say yes, even though it had been 3 years since that last first aid class. She remembered the thought that flashed through her mind. What if I do it wrong? What if she dies because I'm not good enough? But then she'd seen those eyes, the shallow rise and fall of the chest, the fragile thread of life dangling before her, and she'd moved. She remembered the steps clearly. Now tilt the head back. Pinch the nose. 2 breaths. Then steady compression strong. But not too much. She'd counted aloud. Though the rain drowned her voice completely. Her hands had screamed with pain, every joint aching, as if splintering apart. She didn't know how long it lasted, only that she could not stop. Not for a minute. Not for a second. The woman couldn't die. When the ambulance braked in front of the emergency entrance and the doors swung open to a rush of white light, Rachel felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. She gripped the seat to stay upright. A young nurse turned to her, voice brisk, but kind. "Can you come along? She doesn't have any family with her." Rachel nodded. Her mind was still fogged, running on instinct. The emergency room blazed with the sterile brightness of antiseptic and fluorescent lights. Eleanor, that was her name. Rachel heard it when they checked her in, was wheeled down a long corridor surrounded by machines and rushing hands. Rachel was guided to a chair, soaked through, hair clinging to her neck, jacket streaked with mud. She looked down at her palms, red and raw from pressing life back into another body. She had never imagined using the skills she'd learned 3 years ago, back when she worked part-time at a nursing home and needed the certificate to keep the job. Then came the years of moving, hustling, surviving until those lessons were buried deep somewhere in her mind. But tonight, in the storm, faced with the desperation of a dying stranger, it had all come flooding back, vivid and exact, as if it had never left her. The loudspeaker crackled overhead, jolting her from her thoughts. Around here, nurses hurried, monitors beeped, and no one seemed to notice her. She sat there with her hands clasped in her lap, heart still racing, unsure if she should stay or leave. A passing orderly glanced at her as though to ask who she was, but kept walking. She felt invisible, small, and strangely hollow. She had probably lost her job, maybe even her apartment next month. But in that moment, none of it mattered. There was only one thing she wanted: that Eleanor would live, because Rachel knew that if she had walked away tonight, if the woman had died, something inside her would have died too. She couldn't let that happen, not while she still had one heartbeat left to fight for someone else. even if that someone was a stranger. In the middle of a cold and endless rain, the ambulance doors closed behind Rachel, sealing her inside a dim, humid space thick with the scent of antiseptic, the warmth from the heater, and the heavy tension that clung to every breath. On the stretcher, the old woman lay motionless, her pale face half hidden beneath the oxygen mask. Strands of rain-soaked silver hair clung to her forehead. One medic pressed 2 fingers gently against her neck, searching for a pulse, while another adjusted the oxygen tank and murmured medical terms Rachel didn't understand, each one tightening the knot in her chest. She couldn't recall how she'd even climbed into the ambulance. A moment earlier, when the woman's hands had slipped from her own, lifeless and still. Something primal had taken over her body. She didn't remember when she had thrown off her jacket to cover the woman, or how long she had pressed her ear to that frail chest, only that devastating moment when she could no longer hear a heartbeat. She couldn't let it end there, not in front of her, tilting the woman's head back, pinching her nose. She gave 2 breaths, then locked her hands together and began compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. The rain came down like a waterfall as she counted aloud. The sound part rhythm, part prayer, as though her voice might call a drifting soul back to life. Her hands ached after the first 10 compressions, her back stiff from bending forward. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. 21, 22, 23. She pressed, breathed, whispered silent prayers that weren't really words, just a desperate plea that came from somewhere deep. Please don't die. Please stay. Rain drummed on the asphalt, pattered against metal signs, tapped on the bare branches overhead, blending with her ragged counting, with the wind slicing through her clothes, and with the creeping terror eating away at each breath she took. She remembered something from that long-ago first aid class, the instructor's calm voice saying, "The right compressions can keep a heart alive for a while, just long enough for help to arrive." She'd written it down carefully at the time, never imagining she'd need it. Yet now, on a dark, empty street, Rachel was wagering another human being's life on the scraps of her own memory, when the old woman's eyes fluttered open for the briefest instant wet, clouded, full of fragile awareness. Rachel felt tears sting her own. The woman's lips moved, forming what sounded like a single word. "Thank you." Then her eyelids closed again. No more movement. It felt like she was losing her right there. In her arms, Rachel pressed harder. 30 compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her voice broke with effort as she gave 2 more breaths. "Please, don't be silent. Please breathe. Please don't die." The words became a mantra, spoken between gasps, between heartbeats. Somewhere in the distance, a siren's wail rose above the rain, slicing through the night, pulling her back from the edge of despair. Red lights flashed as the ambulance swerved onto the street, tires hissing, brakes screeching as it stopped by the curb. A medic rushed forward, kneeling beside her. "You did great, let us take it from here." Rachel sank onto the cold metal bench of the bus stop, arms limp at her sides, breath ragged, unsure if she was shivering from the cold or from the fading surge of adrenaline. When someone asked if she was family, she could only shake her head. "No, I just saw her there." No one else was helping. A soft, trembling voice answered her. "You saved her life. You know, what you did, it was extraordinary." Rachel didn't know what to say. She only nodded, eyes following as they lifted the stretcher into the ambulance. Just as the doors were about to close, the words burst from her. "Can I come with her? She's alone." After a brief hesitation, the medic nodded. "Get in." And so she sat there now, bathed in the pulse of red emergency lights, hands freezing, body trembling, heart pounding in her chest, the delivery undone, the app account surely locked, the night's pay lost, but none of it mattered anymore. She had done the right thing. She hadn't walked away, and though she didn't even know the woman's name, nor what awaited her at the hospital, Rachel knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not regret this. Not for a single second. The emergency room was bright and cold, like a world detached from time. Rachel sat motionless on a hard plastic chair in the waiting area, her waterlogged shoes leaving faint trails across the polished floor. Outside, the rain hadn't stopped. Each drop struck the glass panes like a reminder that the night was far from over. The clock behind the reception desk read 2:20 in the morning. She had been there for nearly 3 hours. No one had spoken to her or given her any update, only the fleeting shapes of lab coats moving briskly behind swinging doors. People were busy with other emergencies. Rachel understood that, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was just a lost fragment in a space too vast to belong to her. She glanced at her phone. 7 missed calls from the delivery system. 5 warning messages. One final notification had appeared just 10 minutes ago. Your account has been temporarily suspended due to repeated delivery delays. Rachel swallowed hard. She had known this would happen. The moment she'd decided to abandon that last delivery, along with the $5 on-time bonus, she'd accepted the cost. But when she saw the old woman collapsed in the rain, she simply couldn't walk away. And now, here was the consequence. She opened her banking app, $46.03. That was all she had left. Her credit card was nearly maxed out. Rent was almost 3 weeks overdue. She still owed $400 to a clinic for a stomach exam 2 months ago. Rachel sighed, twisting the corner of a damp tissue between her fingers. She didn't dare call anyone. There was no one to call. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 20. Her only cousin lived in Denver, and they hadn't spoken in almost a year. Rachel had grown used to facing things alone. But tonight, for the first time in a long while, the weight of solitude pressed so tightly against her chest, she could hardly breathe. Soft footsteps echoed down the hallway, and Rachel looked up. A middle-aged nurse with a kind, round face approached, clipboard in hand. "You're the one who came in with Mrs. Price. Eleanor DeLuca." "Right." Rachel nodded quickly, almost rising from her seat. "How is she?" "Is she?" The nurse smiled gently, exhaustion flickering behind her eyes. "She's stable now. You saved her life. Without those compressions, things could have been much worse." Rachel exhaled deeply, her shoulders slumping as if releasing a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. The nurse's gaze softened as she took in Rachel's soaked hair, her muddy jacket, her wilted sneakers. "Would you like to see her? She's been asking for you." Rachel hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. I mean, I'm not family." The nurse smiled. "She said you're her angel." "I think she's right." Rachel followed her down the long, sterile corridor, her heart beating slower now, her steps heavy with exhaustion and emotion. She passed rows of lit rooms, some filled with movement and voices, others empty, except for the lingering scent of disinfectant and loss. At the far end, a door stood slightly ajar. Inside, Eleanor lay on a hospital bed, her breathing steady, her face now pink with returning life. When she heard footsteps, her eyes opened. They were brown and aged, yet bright, alive. A faint smile crossed her face. "It's you," she whispered. "My little angel." Rachel stepped closer, her throat tightening. She didn't know why the words touched her so deeply. Maybe because the night had been too long, too cold, too lonely. Or maybe it was because, in that woman's gaze, for the first time in years, she felt truly seen. "I just did what anyone should have done," Rachel murmured. Eleanor's lips curved faintly. "You were there," she said softly, "when no one else stopped. You didn't know who I was, but you saved me. No one does that anymore." Rachel pressed her lips together, unable to find words, but something inside her shifted a quiet stirring, warm and fragile like the first small flame after a long, endless winter. The hospital room was still, the only sound a faint, rhythmic beeping marking each of Eleanor's steady breaths. Rachel sat by the bed, her hands resting on her knees, her eyes fixed on the gentle, time-worn face of the woman she had pulled from the storm the night before. The soft yellow light glowed against Eleanor's thin silver hair, forming a fragile halo that made Rachel feel she was sitting in the presence of something both delicate and sacred. When Eleanor opened her eyes again, they carried the same calm warmth that had stayed with Rachel all night. The old woman reached out a trembling hand. Fragile but full of intention, Rachel hesitated for a moment before taking it. Her skin was cool and dry, yet her grip tightened, as though afraid Rachel might disappear. "What's your name?" Eleanor asked, her voice rasping softly like a whisper through wind. "Rachel. Rachel Morgan." The old woman nodded slowly. "Rachel. It's a beautiful name. I'll remember it for the rest of my life." Rachel smiled faintly and shook her head. "I just happened to be there. I didn't do anything special." Eleanor's gaze deepened, as though she could see straight through every defense Rachel had built to survive. "You stopped," she said quietly, "when no one else did. You knelt in the rain, not knowing who I was, not knowing if I'd live. That wasn't chance. My dear, that was a miracle." Rachel's throat tightened. She didn't know how to respond to being called a miracle. She was used to being invisible to the impatient customers, the cold-eyed manager, the strangers who never remembered her face. But now, as Eleanor held her hand, Rachel felt, for the first time in years, that she truly existed. "Were you waiting for a bus?" Rachel asked softly. "Why were you out there alone so late?" Eleanor exhaled, her gaze drifting toward the ceiling as if reaching for a memory long faded. "I just wanted some air. I like to walk at night, it's quiet. No one bothers me. But last night, I felt unwell and thought I could manage. Then everything went dim. Until I saw you. You were the only one who came. Everyone else walked past. But you didn't." Rachel bit her lip. She remembered it clearly, the man who looked once and hurried away. The woman who crossed the street rather than come closer. They weren't cruel. They were afraid. But it was because everyone was afraid that Eleanor had been left alone. And if Rachel had been afraid too, the woman lying before her now would be gone. "The nurse said no family came with you." Rachel asked gently. "Don't they know you're here?" Eleanor smiled faintly, but there was a heaviness in her eyes. "They know. It's complicated. I didn't want to trouble anyone at this hour. I wanted to be alone." Rachel said nothing more. She understood that sometimes loneliness was a choice, and sometimes it was the result of too many years of unspoken things. Eleanor squeezed her hand tighter. "You're here with me. That's enough." Then she paused, her voice softening to a whisper. "Thank you. My little Angel." Rachel blinked rapidly, unaccustomed to words like that, especially from a stranger. Yet there was something in Eleanor's tone that made it impossible to pull away, or to insist she had done nothing extraordinary, because the truth was, no one else had done what she did. Only her. A nurse tapped lightly on the door. Smiling as she signaled, it was time for the next vitals check. Rachel stood, ready to leave. Before she could speak, Eleanor's voice reached her again. "Come visit me. Won't you? I never believed in fate. Not until tonight." Rachel nodded, a quiet ache rising in her chest. As she stepped out into the hallway, her footsteps felt weightless, but her heart beat with a strength she hadn't felt in years. 3 days later, as Rachel stepped out of a discount grocery store with a few basic items tucked into a canvas bag, a sleek black car pulled up quietly along the curb. It caught her attention at once, not just because the car looked far too expensive for this rundown neighborhood, but because of the 2 men who emerged from it. Both wore black suits, their faces expressionless, their movements precise and deliberate, like men who didn't belong to the ordinary world. One of them, tall and broad-shouldered, walked toward her. His voice was low and steady. "Are you Rachel?" "Morgan." Rachel tightened her grip on the bag. Wary. "Yes. Is something wrong?" The man produced a small, elegant card embossed with 3 silver words. "Vincent DeLuca. He'd like to speak with you," the man said evenly. "Just a conversation." Rachel had never heard the name, but something in his gaze told her she didn't really have the option to refuse. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. The car glided smoothly through the city. Of the interior, a world apart from her daily life, quiet, spotless, smelling faintly of new leather. Rachel sat in silence, trying not to show how uneasy she felt. When the car finally stopped, it was in front of a large mansion, nestled deep within an upscale neighborhood near the park. The wrought iron gates opened automatically, revealing a stone-paved drive lined with perfectly trimmed trees. The symmetry, the silence, the perfection it all made Rachel feel strangely out of place, as though she had stepped into someone else's dream. She was led through a long hallway to a room with tall windows overlooking a manicured garden. Inside, a man stood with his back to her, a glass of wine in his hand. When Rachel entered, he turned. It was the first time she saw Vincent DeLuca. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with black hair streaked in silver and brushed neatly back. His eyes were sharp, intelligent but not as cold as she had imagined. There was something about them that suggested both calculation and understanding. He stepped forward and extended his hand. "Thank you for coming. I'm Vincent, Eleanor's son." Rachel shook his hand. It was warm, firm, controlled. "My mother told me about you," he continued. "You're the one who saved her that night. Without you, I'd have lost her." Rachel shifted awkwardly. "I just did what anyone would have done." Vincent's voice was quiet but certain. "No one else did. Only you stopped. Only you called for help. Performed CPR. In my eyes. That makes you the only person who acted the way a human being should. You have no idea what that means to me." He turned, retrieved a brown leather envelope from the table, and set it between them. "There's $50,000 in here. A small token of thanks for saving my mother." Rachel stared at the envelope as if it were something foreign, out of place in her world. She didn't touch it. "I can't accept that. I didn't do it for money." Vincent raised an eyebrow, not in anger, but in quiet appraisal. "I know. If you had done it for money, you wouldn't have abandoned your delivery job, the one you clearly needed to save a stranger. I just want to make sure you don't have to carry burdens that good people shouldn't bear alone." Rachel said nothing. Part of her wanted to refuse, but another part, the one tangled in reality, with bills piling up, no job, no sleep from endless worry, was screaming that she couldn't keep going like this. She picked up the envelope with both hands, gripping it tightly, her throat dry. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know what to say." Vincent shook his head. "You don't need to say anything. You've already done enough." He studied her for a moment, then added, "My mother would love to see you again. She hasn't stopped talking about you since she woke up. If you're free, I'd like to invite you to dinner with us. Nothing formal, just a family meal." Rachel looked up and met his gaze. There was no threat in his eyes, no pity, only seriousness and sincerity. She nodded. "I'd be honored." For the first time since she'd met him, Vincent smiled, a small, genuine curve of his lips. "Good. Because I think my family should meet the woman who changed everything." That afternoon, when Rachel returned to her cramped third-floor apartment in a rundown building in South Philadelphia, the sky was still a dull gray, as if the rain had never truly stopped. The canvas bag swung lightly at her side, and inside it sat the envelope containing $50,000 money she still had no idea what to do with. She had thought about depositing it, paying her debts, or even disappearing somewhere far away to start over. But after meeting Vincent, after seeing Eleanor's eyes and hearing that quiet invitation to dinner, she sensed that everything in her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet name. Even so, the moment she stepped into the narrow hallway, the smell of mildew mixed with old food snapped her back to reality. There was a bright yellow notice taped to her door. Rachel tore it down, her heart sinking. A rent delinquency warning, the third one in 2 months. She had 7 days to pay the full amount plus penalties or face eviction. The paper crumpled in her fist as she exhaled heavily. She had barely crossed the threshold, still wearing her shoes, when a sharp knock rattled the door. It was Gary Bishop, her landlord, a short, heavy-set man with a permanent squint that made suspicion look like a habit. He didn't bother with greetings. His voice came at her like a shove. "You've got the money now, don't you? Word is someone handed you a big stack, some rich guy paying you back for saving his mother." "Nice work." Rachel froze. "Who told you that?" He smirked. I've got ears in this building. You know that. A delivery girl like you suddenly getting picked up in a luxury car. Meeting someone important. And coming home with a bag full of cash, it doesn't take a genius. He crossed his arms. So, what's it going to be? You pay up. Or I call my lawyer. Rachel wanted to scream. To throw the envelope at his chest and tell him she owed nothing but her own decency. But she didn't. She knew Gary he'd find another way to make her life miserable. Delay her move out. Or worse. Spread rumors that she'd sold herself for money. She clenched her jaw. I'll pay by the end of the week. He sniffed. Good. I'll wait until Friday. But if I don't see a transfer by Saturday, you know what happens. He turned away, casting a nosy glance toward the half-open door of the neighbor across the hall. A nosy old woman who saw everything in this building and missed nothing. When the door closed, Rachel leaned back against the wall, her pulse hammering. She could feel eyes on her from behind curtains, from down the stairwell, from across the street. Lately, wherever she went, someone seemed to be watching. Once, she had caught a man standing by the dumpsters, staring at her until she noticed, then vanishing into the shadows. The sense of being followed clung to her like the damp air in her apartment. She didn't know who they were or why. She only knew that ever since she had accepted that envelope from Vincent DeLuca, the world around her felt different. She unlocked her phone and scrolled through her messages. A new one appeared from an anonymous account. Don't think you're safe just because you have a little money. Rachel's stomach tightened. She blocked the account immediately. But the unease didn't fade. Vincent's voice echoed in her memory, steady. Grave. The world isn't simple. Rachel, when you do the right thing, not everyone is happy. Some people will want to know why you were chosen, and they'll stop at nothing to find out. She pressed her hands to her head, sinking to the floor beside the untouched envelope. Her act of kindness had rippled outward in ways she couldn't control. And for the first time, she understood that stepping into Vincent DeLuca's world even by accident was not without a price. 3 days after the tense encounter with her landlord and the piercing stares that seemed to follow her through every narrow one-teen, moldy hallway, Rachel began to realize that her unease wasn't just nerves. Something was genuinely wrong. She was being watched, not in the vague, paranoid way she'd first imagined, but truly watched. She caught sight of a man sitting in a parked car across the street, staring up at her window for 3 straight hours. He didn't move. I didn't make a call. Didn't smoke, just sat there, eyes fixed on her apartment. When Rachel finally stepped outside pretending to check her mail, the car engine started, and the man drove away slowly, almost deliberately, as if to let her know he'd seen her too. That night, a folded slip of paper was pushed under her door. 4 words scrawled in dark red ink. We know you. Rachel's hands trembled as she held the note, her heart hammering in her chest. She thought of calling Vincent but stopped herself. She didn't know if this was connected to him or something else entirely. Maybe someone from Eleanor's past. Maybe someone keeping tabs on the DeLucas. But why she was nothing? An out-of-work delivery girl living in a half-rotten apartment, drowning in debt, invisible to the world. Yet somehow, she had been pulled into something far bigger than herself. And that night, everything crossed a line. Around 8 o'clock, just as she locked the door behind her to take out the trash, a low voice emerged from the shadows at the end of the corridor. She spun around. A man in a black coat and baseball cap stood less than 10 feet away, hands tucked into his pockets. A scar cut across his face from his left ear down to his jawline. She had never seen him before. He didn't smile. Didn't bother to hide the threat in his eyes. Hello, Rachel, he said. You're brave, saving lives. Dining with the boss. You really think no one noticed? Rachel stepped back, her hand inching toward her phone. He lifted a hand, as if reading her thoughts. If you call anyone, that message will end up on someone else's phone, and we won't be so polite next time. Her grip tightened around the bag. Who are you? What do you want? The man took a step closer. We just want to talk. No one gets hurt if you cooperate. He pulled a thin envelope from his coat pocket money. Rachel could tell immediately. This is a token of appreciation. All you need to do is tell us a few things: Vincent's meetings, who he talks to, where he takes his mother for treatment, who his closest people are. Nothing dangerous. Just listen and report. Easy work. Like your deliveries, only this time. You deliver information, and in return, you won't have to worry about rent anymore. Rachel froze. She had never felt this kind of cornered fear before. Vincent's warnings echoed in her mind, his talk about the world he lived in, about people who watched, waited, and looked for weakness. She had been a bystander once, but now they wanted her inside the circle. The man saw her hesitation and lowered his voice. You don't owe Vincent anything. He's rich, powerful, and you've got nothing but kindness. Kindness doesn't pay bills. Rachel, he let the words hang. Deliberate and slow. We'll be back. You have 2 days. If you agree, leave a red mark on your door. If you don't, he didn't finish. He didn't have to. His look said the rest. Then he turned and disappeared into the dark hallway, leaving behind nothing but the echo of his footsteps. Rachel stood rooted in place, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. Her fingers clenched until her knuckles turned white. Her mind spun fear, anger, despair, all tangling together. She didn't know what they would do if she refused. But she knew one thing for certain: if she said yes, she would stop being herself. And even if the whole world turned against her, she still wanted to hold on to the last piece of decency she had left. But with danger closing in from every side, she wondered, would decency be enough to keep her alive? Rachel didn't sleep that night. She sat curled up in the worn armchair by the window, the lights off, every electronic unplugged, as though that could keep the world at bay. The street lamp outside bled through the thin curtain, casting faint patterns on the floor. Shadows slipped past her door, light footsteps vanishing down the hallway. And every creak, every whisper of movement made her heart leap. She held her phone in both hands, the screen black, her thumb hovering over the single contact she had saved under one name, Vincent D. For hours, she told herself not to call. She was afraid that if she did, everything would spiral beyond her control, that she'd owe something to a world she barely understood. But when she caught sight of a man standing under her window again, wearing the same baseball cap as the night before, unmoving, silent, for nearly 10 minutes, something in her broke. She pressed the number. Vincent answered after 2 rings, his voice clear, calm, unsurprised. Rachel, what's wrong? She didn't speak at first, partly because her throat had tightened, partly because she knew that once she began, the truth would come rushing out, and there would be no way to take it back. When she finally did, her voice trembled, low and guilty, as though confessing a sin. They found me. I think they're your enemies. They threatened me, offered me money. They want me to betray you. Vincent was silent for a few seconds, not out of shock, but thought. When he spoke again, his tone was measured. What exactly did they say? Rachel told him everything word for word. The man with the scar, the envelope, the way he disappeared into the dark as if he'd never existed. When she finished, there was a quiet sigh on the other end, deep. Resoluta. Where are you right now? At home? Yes, she whispered. But I can't stay here anymore. I feel them watching me. Vincent's reply was only 4 words, steady and certain. Pack your things. I'm coming. Less than 40 minutes later, the familiar black SUV pulled up in front of the building. Rachel grabbed what little she could, a few changes of clothes, an old notebook, her phone, the envelope Vincent had given her, and a small photograph of her parents taken long ago. Everything else she left behind, whether she returned or not. This place was no longer home. As she descended the stairwell, a neighbor peered through a cracked door, the curiosity in her eyes replaced now by caution. Rachel offered a faint nod before hurrying outside. She climbed into the car without a word. Vincent didn't ask questions, and she didn't ask where they were going. Through the rear-view mirror, she watched the old building recede into the mist, swallowed by the gray light of the street lamps. They drove in silence for nearly half an hour, Vincent kept his eyes on the road, glancing at the mirrors every so often. When they finally stopped, it was in front of a small 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood far from the city center. The air was crisp, the yard lined with neatly trimmed hedges, a white picket fence still smelling of fresh paint, the kind of place where no one shouted, where danger couldn't reach so easily. "This is a guest house," Vincent said as he opened her door. "My people will keep you safe here. No one except those I trust knows this address. Stay as long as you need." Rachel looked up at him, eyes red from exhaustion. "Why are you helping me? I'm just no one." Vincent met her chaza, his expression steady, not pity, but recognition. "You saved my mother. But it's not just that. In the world I live in, honesty and kindness are rarer than loyalty. People like you remind me they still exist. That's worth more than any debt." Inside, the house was warm and quietly alive. Fresh sheets on the bed, a stocked refrigerator, a bright bathroom, and a small note on the kitchen table with the Wi-Fi password written neatly across it. Rachel walked to the window, parting the curtain. Outside, the garden glowed softly under the golden light from the porch. For the first time in days, there were no footsteps beneath her window, no shadow in the glass, no knocks in the dark. She let out a long breath, the first deep one she'd taken in what felt like forever. Not because the danger had passed, but because for once she wasn't running alone. And somewhere out there, beyond the walls and the silence, she knew she finally had a place to begin again. The next morning, Rachel woke to a feeling she hadn't known in years' peace. The guest house around her was utterly still, the air clean, the sunlight filtering through the curtains in soft, golden ribbons that made everything look gentler, almost like a memory from a life she thought she'd lost. She brewed coffee, sat by the small kitchen table, and watched the garden behind the house shimmer under the morning light. For the first time in weeks, she exhaled without fear that someone was watching her from the shadows. But as calm began to settle, something older stirred inside her anger, not toward the men who had threatened her, but toward Gary Bishop, the landlord who had bullied her, spread lies, and tried to profit from her brief stroke of luck after an act of simple kindness. Rachel opened her laptop. The calm in her movements belied the sharp focus in her eyes. She went to the city's public records portal where housing violation cases were listed, and it didn't take long to find his name. Gary Bishop. More than once, tenants had filed complaints about unsafe living conditions, leaking pipes, and withheld deposits. Some cases were settled quietly, others were still pending. Rachel straightened in her chair, the faint tremor in her hands replaced by a deliberate steadiness. If he could use the law to push her out, she could use the same law to pull his deceit into the light. She composed a detailed email to the City Housing Inspection Department, attaching photos of the mold spreading across her ceiling, the abnormally high electric bills despite a broken heater, and the string of harassing messages he'd sent her. She noted, point by point, each violation, illegal entry without notice, neglect of maintenance, intimidation. When she hit send, she didn't stop. She called a local nonprofit that offered free legal support to exploited tenants. The woman who answered sounded calm, experienced, the kind of voice that had guided many through fear. After hearing Rachel's story, she said firmly, "We've had our eye on that building for a while. If you're willing to testify, we'll handle the rest." Rachel didn't hesitate. "I'm willing." A week later, still staying at the quiet guest house, Rachel received an email from the city's legal office. The investigation was officially open. They asked for additional evidence, and she was ready. Photos, videos, written notices. She documented everything. She even managed to reach 3 former tenants from the same building. They agreed to join her complaint, their stories echoing her own threats of rent hikes, withheld deposits, shut-off utilities. Their voices together formed a truth that could no longer be ignored. Vincent heard about it not long after. He didn't try to stop her. He simply asked, "Are you sure you want to take this on? He might retaliate." Rachel met his gaze without wavering. "He already threw me out when I had nothing. He made me believe I didn't have a voice. but now I do. Vincent nodded. If you need a lawyer, I'll get you the best. Rachel shook her head. No. This one, I'll do myself. I don't fight with threats or force. I just want him to understand that even people without power still have rights. A month later, the city issued its ruling. Gary Bishop was fined for 3 major housing violations, ordered to return all withheld deposits, and placed under official watch. If he failed to repair the building, he would lose management rights entirely. Rachel never went back to that apartment. But word spread quickly. Former tenants emailed her to say thank you. Even the elderly neighbor who had once eyed her with disdain left a handwritten note at the legal office. That girl did what no one else in the building dared to do. Rachel read the note in silence. Not with pride, but with a quiet understanding. Some battles don't need applause, they just need someone to stand up first. And this time, she had. One autumn afternoon, when the sunlight had turned the color of honey and the air carried that faint chill only October brings, Rachel received an unexpected call from Vincent. His voice was the same, low, calm, measured, but this time, there was something gentler in it, almost warm. My mother would like to see you, he said, not to talk about the past, or to thank you again. She has a proposal. If you could come by the house tomorrow afternoon, it would make her very happy. Rachel was silent for a moment, staring out the window where golden leaves drifted lazily into the small backyard of the guest house. She had been here nearly a month safe, steady, surrounded by quiet, and in that stillness, she had begun to think about her future. Finally, she nodded, her voice soft. I'll be there. The DeLuca estate always left her slightly awed. It wasn't its wealth or grandeur that struck her most, but the feeling that every brick, every framed painting held its own story, its own secret. Eleanor was seated by the tall window, a dark brown wool shawl draped over her knees. Her eyes brightened when Rachel entered. The young woman smiled, shy but sincere. You're looking stronger, Rachel said softly. Eleanor nodded. A little more each day, perhaps because I've been reminded there are still good people in the world. It gives this old heart a reason to keep working a bit longer. After a few minutes of gentle conversation, Eleanor turned to the real reason she'd called. I used to have a personal assistant, she began. She helped me around the house, took me to appointments, kept my medications in order, and sometimes just listened. But she's moved to California to care for her mother. And she paused, her eyes steady on Rachel's. I don't want a stranger in my home anymore. I want someone I trust. Someone I know. Would you consider it? Rachel blinked, caught off guard. Me, as your assistant. But I don't have experience caring for anyone elderly. I wouldn't know where to start, Eleanor smiled, and the warmth in her gaze quieted every protest. You have a kind heart, Rachel. The rest can be taught. Vincent had been standing by the doorway, watching quietly. Now he spoke, his tone firm but kind. She's been asking for you for weeks. My mother trusts you, and so do I. Rachel lowered her head, her pulse racing. She thought of everything that had led her here. The rain-soaked night, the apartment she'd lost, the man with the scar, the fear, and then the fragile, miraculous thread of safety that had followed. She thought of how rare it was, in her life, to be truly seen. And now, standing in this sunlit room, she realized this wasn't just a job being offered to her. It was a chance to rebuild her life with purpose. It would be an honor, she said at last, her voice trembling. I'll do my best. Eleanor's smile deepened, gentle and bright as late afternoon light. Good, she said softly, because from now on, you're not just helping me, you're family. The next day, Rachel moved her belongings from the guest house into a small room at the back of the main estate, the same one that once belonged to the previous assistant. It was simple but cozy, with a window overlooking the rose garden, a writing desk, and an armchair almost identical to Eleanor's. She unpacked in silence, each item feeling like a marker of the strange, beautiful path that had led her here. Outside, The wind whispered through the trees, scattering golden leaves across the garden paths. But this time, Rachel didn't feel adrift. She felt rooted. And for the first time in years, she knew without doubt that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The first days living and working inside the DeLuca estate felt to Rachel both unfamiliar and deeply, almost inexplicably, comforting. Each morning, sunlight filtered through the trees and poured softly into her small room, waking her with its gentle gold instead of the blaring horns and chaos that used to greet her in her old neighborhood. There were no footsteps outside her door. No midnight knocks. No unseen threats whispering through the walls. Instead, there was birdsong, and the tender whistle of the kettle from the kitchen whenever Eleanor woke earlier than usual. Her work was nothing like what she'd feared. It wasn't exhausting, it was grounding, tender, and filled with a quiet sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Every morning she brewed chamomile tea for Eleanor, the same blend the older woman had loved since her youth. Then she helped her with light stretches in the back garden, where the rose bushes were bursting into bloom. Some mornings, Rachel brushed Eleanor's hair, and the older woman would drift into stories about her late husband, about the time Vincent was expelled from school for fighting, or about how she'd once run away from home for 3 months just to learn flamenco in Spain. Rachel didn't just listen with her ears, she listened with her heart. Every story was a fragment of memory, and every memory a glimpse into who Eleanor really was, not the mother of a powerful man as the world saw her, but a woman who had lived and loved and made mistakes, now closing the final chapters of her life with remarkable grace. In the afternoons, they read together or worked on crossword puzzles. Sometimes Eleanor would insist on playing old jazz records, claiming Rachel had to learn how to hear love from the crackle of vinyl and the tremble of a trumpet from a time. She said, when people sent their hearts through letters, not text messages. Once, while the music played softly, Eleanor turned to Rachel, her eyes bright with mischief. If you could fall in love again, she asked, would you choose the one who makes you feel safe, or the one who makes your heart race so fast you forget to breathe? Rachel had only smiled, unsure of what to say, but the question lingered long after the record ended. At night, Rachel helped Eleanor sort her medications, recording her symptoms carefully for the family doctor. She learned to read prescriptions, to recognize signs of mild heart failure, to respond when Eleanor grew dizzy. Everything was new. Yet with patience and with the trust Eleanor so freely gave her, Rachel grew confident. Sometimes Vincent appeared late in the evening. He rarely spoke, simply nodded at Rachel, before sitting quietly beside his mother, holding her hand in silence. Rachel never tried to listen, but she noticed the small, unspoken tenderness between them, the way Vincent's eyes softened, the way his thumb brushed over Eleanor's knuckles. He might have been a powerful man to the world, but here, beside his mother, he was still a son who had never quite outgrown his boyhood. One evening, when Eleanor seemed more tired than usual, Rachel sat beside her and admitted softly, I'm afraid I'll do something wrong. Eleanor smiled with her eyes half closed. That's all right. My little Angel. Some things don't have to be perfect. They just have to be done with heart. That's enough. Rachel wrote those words in her notebook, and they became her quiet guide. Every morning after that, she didn't just wake up to work. She woke up to be there, to be present with someone whose days were slowly winding down, to make those days meaningful, warm, and filled with dignity. And what she never expected was that in caring for Eleanor and giving peace to another soul, she was, without realizing it, healing the broken places inside herself. One quiet weeknight, just as Rachel was helping Eleanor with her medication and preparing to retreat to her room, Vincent appeared unexpectedly in the doorway of the kitchen. Tonight, he looked different, simpler. His dark blue shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, his expression touched with fatigue, though his eyes still carried that steady calm that seemed to define him. He watched her for a moment before speaking, his tone softer than usual. Are you free tonight? Have dinner with me. Rachel froze, still holding the porcelain cup in her hand. The question was simple, but her mind stalled, unsure how to respond. She searched his face for signs of formality, of politeness, of pity, but there was only sincerity. After a pause, she nodded gently. Yes, I'm free. Dinner was at a small Italian restaurant tucked away in a quiet alley behind Chestnut Street, where golden lights bathed the room in a soft glow that felt almost private. They sat by the window, no bodyguards, no tension, no air of business or debt. Vincent ordered something modest pasta and a light wine. What surprised Rachel most was that he began not with small talk or gratitude, but with a memory. When I was 10, he said, I skipped school just to find a cannoli my mother once mentioned. I walked for almost 2 hours. My grandfather caught me halfway through eating it and dragged me home, but my mother didn't scold me. She split what was left in half and said, if you're brave enough to chase something, make sure it's worth remembering for the rest of your life. Rachel laughed softly, the kind of laugh that escapes before you realize it, and saw, for the first time, a boyish light in Vincent's eyes, tender and human. She told him stories in return about her parents, about the countryside before she moved to the city, about small dreams and the lost direction that followed their deaths. Their words flowed easily, like water finding its rhythm. No tension, no masks, just two people, each carrying their quiet scars, finding a strange comfort in each other's company. After dinner, they walked slowly through the calm streets. The night air was cool, brushing against them like silk. Rachel tightened her coat, and Vincent walked beside her, keeping a gentle distance close enough to feel safe, far enough not to intrude. They stopped before a closed bookstore, the yellow lamplight spilling over dust-covered covers behind the glass. Rachel's eyes lingered on one book. Its spine faded, the weight of silence. Some sorrows don't need to be spoken, she murmured. Sometimes it's enough to have someone sit beside you. Vincent didn't answer right away. He simply looked at her, long and searching, then nodded slowly, as if he understood all too well what silence could mean. When they returned to the estate, he stopped at the gate but didn't move to go in. Thank you for coming, he said quietly. Not everyone makes me feel at ease after a long day. Rachel smiled, something warm and unfamiliar, blooming gently in her chest, a quiet flutter that melted through the armor she'd built around her heart. The days that followed changed nothing in appearance, yet everything beneath the surface. Vincent still came to visit his mother, but his eyes lingered on Rachel longer now, softer, as though seeing her not just as someone kind, but as someone known. Sometimes their encounters were fleeting, a passing greeting in the hallway, a shared glance, but there was an understanding between them now, unspoken yet undeniable. Rachel didn't try to define it. She didn't run from it either. She simply went on caring for Eleanor, each act of kindness as natural as breathing. Yet at night, in her small room overlooking the rose garden, she would find herself thinking back to the golden light of that restaurant, to the story of a boy chasing a cannoli, and to the silence they'd shared before a dusty bookshop window. Something was quietly growing between them, slow, unhurried, real, and for the first time in years, Rachel was no longer afraid to feel her heart open. It was a gentle Saturday morning when Rachel was brewing Eleanor's tea, just as she did every day. When Vincent appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression was calm but carried something new, a quiet gravity beneath the usual composure. He set an ivory-colored envelope beside the teapot and said, in his low, steady voice, "Tonight we're having a small gathering, family only. You're the guest of honor." Rachel froze for a moment, her fingers still warm from the steam of the kettle. Vincent continued, his tones soft yet deliberate. "My mother wants to introduce you to everyone. This isn't just a job anymore. You're part of our lives now. Not many people are invited to this dinner. And if you accept, it means you're ready to take another step into our world. All day." The thought lingered in her mind. She had never attended a dinner like that, let alone one hosted by a family like the DeLucas. She went through her modest wardrobe, finally settling on a pale green dress, simple but graceful. When she entered the grand hall at dusk, the room glowed with warm light from chandeliers and tall floral arrangements. Soft jazz played in the background. Eleanor sat at the center of it all, regal yet kind, while Vincent, dressed in a charcoal suit, watched Rachel approach, his gaze lingering just long enough to unsettle her heartbeat. She walked slowly toward them, aware that every step felt like crossing an invisible threshold from outsider to something else entirely. Eleanor reached out, clasped Rachel's hand gently, and spoke loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "This is Rachel," she said, "the young woman who saved my life in the rain that night. And from this day on, she is family." The room went still for a brief moment. A few curious glances flickered across the table, some warm, some cautious, but Rachel didn't feel small. Eleanor's presence was a shield, and Vincent's nod beside her was a quiet promise. She was invited into conversations at the long dining table, men discussing wine and real estate, women sharing stories of children, fashion, and bits of gossip too mild to wound. At one point, an older woman, Eleanor's sister, perhaps asked if Rachel was a distant relative from Italy. Since her name didn't sound familiar, Vincent answered before she could. "Rachel is someone special," he said simply, and that ended the question. Later in the evening, as the chatter softened and the lights dimmed to a golden haze, Rachel found herself standing near the large window that overlooked the garden, its pathways strung with soft lights. Vincent joined her quietly. The sky outside was a deep navy, stars faint behind a veil of clouds. "How do you feel?" he asked. Rachel exhaled, her voice almost a whisper. "Strange, but not out of place." Vincent nodded slowly, his gaze steady. "You belong wherever you can be yourself. For my mother, that's honesty. For me, it's courage. The girl who stopped in the rain to save a stranger isn't ordinary. And tonight, you took another step forward." When the guests finally left, and the last traces of laughter faded, Rachel stayed behind to help the staff clear the tables. Eleanor called her over, holding a small silver box. Inside was a delicate hairpin, carved in the shape of a rose. "This belonged to my mother-in-law," Eleanor said. "She gave it to me the night I was officially welcomed into the DeLuca family. Now I'm giving it to you. Not for a name, not for status, but because you carry something this family lost long ago, kindness that asks for nothing in return." Rachel's eyes glistened. She held the pin carefully, the silver cool against her palm, and understood that in that moment, though she didn't bear the DeLuca name, she had become one of them. Not because of gratitude, not because of debt, but because she had chosen this path with her whole heart. After that family dinner, life seemed to settle into a gentle rhythm for Rachel. Her days moved with quiet purpose, marked by the familiar routine of caring for Eleanor, no longer out of duty, but from a deep sense of belonging. The house, once a place of uncertainty, now felt like home. Even her connection with Vincent began to change, not through words or grand gestures, but in the subtle ways two people begin to notice each other more closely. A longer glance, a softer tone, a shared silence that carried more meaning than speech. Neither dared to name it, but both felt its quiet presence, growing between them like something fragile and real. But peace, as Rachel would soon learn, never lasted long in the DeLuca world. It began one late afternoon at the grocery store. She had gone out to buy a few things for Eleanor. Nothing unusual. Yet when she stepped into the parking lot, a shiver ran through her, the unmistakable sense of being watched. A black SUV sat a few meters away, windows tinted too dark to see inside. She turned quickly and walked to her car, pretending not to notice. But the weight of unseen eyes followed her all the way home. At first, she dismissed it as paranoia, but then it happened again. Once, while walking with Eleanor through the park near the estate, Rachel noticed a man standing at a distance, hands in his coat pockets, cap pulled low, gaze fixed on them. When she turned to look back, he feigned a phone call and disappeared into the trees. The third time, a note was left behind the windshield of her car. "Some people don't belong there." The words were jagged, written in red ink, but the message was clear. It wasn't a warning. It was a threat. Rachel brought the note straight to Vincent. For a moment, he said nothing, only stared at it. his jaw tightening. Then he called one of his most trusted men, ordered more security at the estate, and told Rachel only, "Stay inside. I'll handle the rest." That night, Vincent received a phone call from an unlisted number. The voice on the other end was low, rough, laced with mockery. "You really think you can keep her safe by locking her away? Your mother's got a new caretaker, and you've got a soft spot for the girl. Careful. Vincent. Not everyone approves." He didn't need a name to know who it was. Ronnie. Once. Ronnie had been his closest friend, a brother in all but blood, until betrayal turned him into an enemy. 10 years ago, Ronnie had sided with rivals in a bid for power, a move that nearly got Eleanor killed in a failed ambush. Vincent had spared his life then, but exiled him, swearing never to hear his name again. And yet here he was, back in Philadelphia, just as Rachel had found her place among them. It couldn't be coincidence. Over the next few days, strangers began to appear in the neighborhood. They didn't approach or speak to Rachel, but their presence was unmistakable. A shadow at the edge of sight, a reminder that danger was patient. One evening, while she was watering the roses behind the house, Rachel heard footsteps beyond the fence light. Deliberate, she turned sharply and saw a man standing on the other side. His face was half hidden in the dark, his eyes cold and steady. He said nothing, didn't move, just watched her for several long seconds before walking away. Her pulse thundered. She backed into the house, locked the door, and called Vincent. Her voice was steady but shaking beneath the surface, not from fear, but from anger. "What are they doing? What do they want from me? I've done nothing wrong." Vincent arrived within minutes. For the first time, Rachel saw him furious, not at her, but at the unseen hands tightening around them. He didn't waste words. He simply placed a firm hand on her shoulder and said, "This time, no one touches you. I promise." But Vincent knew the truth. With Ronnie's return, this was no longer a private matter. His old friend had come back for more than revenge. He wanted leverage. And Rachel, the woman who had saved his mother and unwittingly crossed into his world, had become the perfect target. The battle ahead would not be fought in the streets or over territory. It would be fought in silence and loyalty, in love, in the choices that defined who they were. And for Vincent DeLuca, losing was no longer an option. Not when everything sacred, his family, his peace, her, was now on the line. The night carried no rain, only a quiet chill that felt like a warning. Rachel had just finished preparing Eleanor's herbal tea and set the cup gently on the wooden table beside her bed when she noticed something off. The older woman's complexion was paler than usual, her smile faint and forced. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the cup, her eyes unfocused, despite the effort to appear alert. Rachel felt it immediately, a heaviness in her chest, a premonition, when Eleanor's hand began to shake too violently to hold the cup. Rachel caught it just in time. "Let me help you," she said softly, but before Eleanor could answer, a shallow gasp escaped her lips. Her body stiffened. Her chest convulsed once, twice. Rachel's heartbeat pounded in her ears. She didn't need a doctor to know what was happening. A cardiac episode. Training and instinct took over. Rachel eased Eleanor down, adjusted her pillow to keep her airway open, and ran to the cabinet where she kept the emergency supplies. Within seconds, she had the blood pressure monitor and pulse oximeter ready. The numbers blinked back in urgent red blood pressure plummeting. Pulse irregular. Her hands trembled as she dialed the private physician's number. When the call connected, her voice was tight but clear, giving every detail. Eleanor DeLuca. Acute cardiac distress, low blood pressure, irregular rhythm. "We need an ambulance immediately." Following the doctor's calm instructions, Rachel loosened Eleanor's collar, opened the window for air, and kept speaking to her, coaxing her to stay awake. "Please, stay with me," she whispered, gripping her hand. "You told me we're family. I'm not letting you go. Not like this." Eleanor's lips were nearly colorless now, her breath shallow, but her hand frail, cold, tightened faintly around Rachel's fingers. It was the smallest gesture, but it told Rachel that she was still fighting. The wail of sirens grew louder until flashing lights painted the walls. Rachel ran outside to meet them, waving frantically, then led the paramedics in. She explained everything with calm precision, the symptoms, her readings, Eleanor's medications. The team worked quickly, attaching oxygen, starting an IV, securing her to the stretcher. Rachel was allowed to ride along. She was, after all, the caregiver. Inside the ambulance, she never once looked away from Eleanor's face. Her lips moved, but no words came out, only the rhythm of prayer, unspoken but fervent, as if her heart itself were pleading with the universe. Vincent arrived at the hospital less than 10 minutes after they did. He found Rachel in the hallway, sitting hunched over, her hair damp with sweat, her eyes rimmed with red. He didn't ask what had happened. He simply knelt, placed a steady hand on her shoulder, and said quietly, "You did everything right." She looked up, caught between relief and fear, just as the doctor emerged from the ER. "She's stable," he said. If help had come 15 minutes later, it would have been too late. Vincent exhaled, the tension breaking like a dam. He sat beside Rachel in the waiting area. Neither spoke for a long time. The hum of machines, the echo of footsteps, the low murmur of nurses filled the silence. Finally, Vincent said, "You've saved my mother twice now. The first time, it was instinct. This time, it was love." Rachel didn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth of it hung between them like something sacred. That night, she stayed at the hospital with Vincent. They took turns sitting by Eleanor's bed, the glow of the monitors washing over their tired faces. Just before dawn, Eleanor stirred, her eyes fluttered open, searching until they found Rachel. A weak smile curved her lips. "You're my miracle," she whispered, and Rachel realized then, it wasn't just about saving a life. It was about preserving something far rarer, the bond born of trust, loyalty, and love between souls who had started as strangers but had chosen, against every odd, to become family. 2 days after Eleanor was moved out of intensive care, the DeLuca estate fell into a silence so heavy it seemed to hum. Rachel did her best to keep life moving as usual, tending to the garden, preparing tea, keeping the staff calm, but beneath the quiet, she could feel something shifting, a tremor beneath the polished surface. Vincent spent most of his time at the hospital. When he was home, he spoke little, retreating to his study for brief, clipped phone calls. Names she didn't recognize, orders that sounded like warnings. Ronnie's shadow had spread across their world again, and Rachel knew it was only a matter of time before it broke open. One fog-wrapped morning, Rachel was pruning roses when a stranger appeared at the gate. He was tall, sharply built, his beard trimmed to precision, his manner almost polite, but his eyes had a gleam that cut like steel. The guard recognized him instantly and called inside. Within minutes, Vincent emerged, flanked by 2 men. Rachel instinctively hid behind the rose bushes. Her breath held as the stranger stepped forward. His name was Damien, Vincent's cousin. Eleanor had mentioned him once, in passing, her voice filled with an old sadness. He had once been like a brother to Vincent, until a violent rift had sent him away 10 years ago. And now he was back not to visit Eleanor, but to deliver a message. "You still look calm," Damien said, his smile taut with irony. "But I think this time, you'll have to bend. Ronnie isn't the lone wolf he used to be. He's got allies, money, and a new agenda." Vincent crossed his arms, his expression turning to granite. "And you?" he asked. Back as what, an ally or a traitor? Damien shrugged lightly. "I'm a realist. I go where survival makes sense. Ronnie wants back what he thinks was stolen from him. And you, well, you've got a stranger living under your roof. The girl doesn't belong in this family." Vincent. Is she really worth all this? The instant Rachel's name left his mouth, Vincent took a single step forward. His voice dropped, quiet but razor sharp. "Don't speak of her. Not if you want to keep this civil." Damien's smirk faltered. though only for a heartbeat. So it's true. Then, you've gone soft. Careful, Vincent said, his tone cutting through the fog. You think Ronnie's collection of new faces can undo everything I've built? I spared his life once out of mercy. Not fear. If you came here as his messenger, walk back out before I forget that. Damien's smile faded completely. He looked at Vincent for a long moment, then let his gaze drift toward the house. For one awful second, Rachel thought his eyes found her. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, almost weary. I just hope you know who you're trusting. Some people, no matter how much you save them, only make it easier for you to lose everything. Then he turned and disappeared into the fog, leaving behind a silence that felt like the edge of a storm. Vincent stood motionless, his jaw tight, until he finally spoke without turning around. He was like a brother to me, he said quietly. But loyalty, once it's broken, never comes back. And Ronnie, he isn't just a shadow anymore. He's the storm that's coming. That night, Rachel didn't sleep, not out of fear, but from the weight of helplessness pressing on her chest. She wasn't part of this world, yet she was now bound to it by choice, by love, by something she couldn't name. And when she saw Vincent at the hospital, sitting beside Eleanor's bed with her hand in his battery, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights and burdened by too many memories, she understood. He was preparing for something inevitable, a confrontation not just between two men, but between past and present, between faith and betrayal, between what must be protected and what must be lost. And this time, Rachel knew she was no longer standing on the outside. The afternoon sky hung low and gray, heavy with the weight of what had transpired between Vincent and Damien. Rachel left the hospital alone, her hands clutching a short list of groceries for Eleanor. But what she really needed was airspace to breathe, to escape the tension that had wrapped itself around the DeLuca estate like a wire pulled too tight. She had just stepped out of the small corner market when she noticed him. A tall man stood by the curb, his clothes plain, his face sun-darkened. But there was something in his eyes that set her instincts on edge. He smiled as if he'd been waiting. "You're Rachel." "Right. Someone would like a word with you. Just a few minutes." Before she could answer, he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "It's about Vincent, and the truth you haven't been told." Rachel froze. Part of her wanted to walk away, to vanish into the safety of the crowd. But the other part, the one caught between fear and curiosity, kept her rooted to the spot. The man gestured toward a black SUV parked across the street. The passenger door opened, and another figure emerged. Damien. Gone was the mocking smile he had worn days earlier. Today his expression was calm, even somber, touched with something that might have been pity. "We don't want to hurt you," he said, "but you need to know that you've put your faith in the wrong place. You think Vincent's a good man. You think the DeLucas are noble just because they've treated you kindly." Rachel gripped the paper bag in her hands, lifted her chin, and met his gaze. "I don't think anything. I just remember who showed me kindness and who didn't." Damien sighed and reached into his coat, pulling out a thin envelope. "Then take this. It's proof. Inside, you'll find records of something that happened years ago. An internal correction, ordered by Vincent himself. Someone innocent disappeared because of it." His tone hardened. "Ask yourself why you were brought into that house so quickly, when even family members can't cross that threshold. What makes you so special? Rachel, or are you just a convenient piece on the board?" Wind lifted her hair, bringing with it the faint scent of asphalt and the first cold breath of autumn. She looked down at the envelope, then back up at Damien. She didn't open it, didn't even ask what it contained. Her voice came quiet but steady. "Why do you care so much about me?" Damien's smile returned small, almost sad. "Because you're Vincent's weakness. And in this game, weakness is the door to victory. You could help us. You know, nothing dangerous. Just small details. Schedules. Meetings. Who comes and goes. You'd be protected. You'd never have to look over your shoulder again. You could walk away. Start over. Live a normal life." Rachel didn't hesitate. I already had a normal life," she said, her voice trembling, not from fear but conviction. It was filled with fear, loneliness, and helplessness. "Here, for the first time, I belong somewhere. No matter how dark this world is, I won't betray the people who saved me." Damien exhaled softly, as though he had expected nothing less. "Then I hope you're as strong as you sound. Because next time we meet, it won't be this polite." He turned away, signaling to the man beside her. The stranger stepped closer, so near that Rachel could feel his breath. His words came out like ice. "Remember, sometimes all it takes is a small accident, a slip in the shower, a break that doesn't hold. Don't test your luck." They left as suddenly as they had appeared, swallowed by the dim street and the whispering fog. Rachel stood there for a long time, her fingers digging into the envelope until the paper crumpled. Then she walked home, locked the door behind her, and leaned against it, breath ragged as if she'd escaped a storm. That night, she didn't sleep. The envelope lay on her desk, an accusation she refused to hear. When dawn broke, she rose, fed the fire in the hearth, and tossed it in unopened. She didn't need its contents to decide where her loyalty lay. Because some things cannot be bought, cannot be threatened into submission, and even a heart once shattered can still choose where it belongs. The next morning, after a sleepless night, Rachel made herself a cup of hot tea and sat quietly on the back steps, where the early sunlight filtered through the branches and scattered into shimmering patterns, like fragments of colored glass. She looked out over the garden, feeling an unfamiliar emptiness, less fear than the quiet ache of someone who knew there was no turning back. Inside the house, Eleanor had just returned from the hospital. Her recovery steady but fragile. Rachel heard the soft roll of wheelchair wheels against the wooden floor. Then Eleanor's voice weak but unwavering, like the woman herself. "Morning tea," she said gently, "is the best way to begin the day, no matter what storms may come." Rachel turned, rose, and took her hand, guiding her toward the wooden bench beneath the bougainvillea trellis. Eleanor sat slowly, exhaling as if to release some invisible weight, then fixed her gaze on Rachel. "Come, sit with me, child." Rachel sat beside her, her face drawn with fatigue. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Eleanor reached out, her thin fingers warm and steady. "I know something troubles you," she said softly. "You carry more inside you than you ever say. But today, I won't ask. Today, I only want to say thank you." Rachel looked startled. "You don't need to thank me," she murmured. "I just did what I was supposed to." Eleanor smiled faintly, her eyes glimmering with a sad kind of grace. "No, my dear, you didn't just do what was expected. You stayed when you could have left. You chose to stand by me, by this family, even knowing how complicated we are. And to someone who has lived as long as I have, that kind of choice means more than anything." She shifted slightly, turning to face Rachel fully. "Do you know something?" she asked. "Family isn't always where we're born. It's where we decide to stay. It's the people we choose to love and protect. Not because we must, but because we want to. Family is a choice. And I know that Vincent has chosen you, just as I have." Rachel's throat tightened. She had never expected to be acknowledged like this. Everything she had done had come from a place of genuine care for Eleanor, for Vincent, for this house that had slowly become a home. But Eleanor's words sank deep, like an invisible embrace, dissolving years of loneliness she had carried like armor. Eleanor squeezed her hand gently, her voice growing quieter but no less certain. "You may not bear the DeLuca name. You may not know everything about our past. But that's exactly why you see things more clearly than any of us what's right, what's wrong. And I trust that when the time comes, you'll know what to do. Because you have the heart of someone who loves without keeping score." Rachel's eyes burned. She couldn't speak, only nodded, lowering her hand to rest atop Eleanor's. They sat there for a long while, wrapped in sunlight and silence, as though the world outside had momentarily forgotten to turn. When the sun climbed higher and the leaves began to stir in the wind, Eleanor was the one to break the stillness. I once believed my life would end quietly in a sterile room, surrounded by servants and the hum of machines, she said. But then you came, and you made me feel alive again, not just surviving, but living. Rachel smiled through her tears, making no attempt to hide them. For the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to be seen as family, not by blood, but by choice, by love freely given and freely returned. And in that moment, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: whatever storms lay ahead, she would not run, because this was the family she had chosen, and for the first time, someone had chosen her too. 3 days after the quiet, heartfelt conversation between Rachel and Eleanor, a strange silence settled over the DeLuca estate. Vincent was absent from both the house and the hospital, unreachable by his personal phone, though his close associates reassured Rachel that he was managing an emergency and that everything remained under control. Rachel said nothing, but she could feel an undercurrent of movement, a subtle vibration underfoot, like the earth itself warning of an impending tremor. On the 4th night, Vincent returned. His black coat was soaked with the chill of the late-night mist, his eyes heavier and more somber than Rachel had ever seen. He entered his study, locked the door, and demanded no interruptions. The next morning, he called Rachel in. The room was bathed in pale golden light, yet Vincent's voice carried a cold edge that made it feel frigid. They hit 3 of our locations in 2 nights. Lives lost, stock lost, trust lost. Rachel stood silent, tense, not asking what he intended to do. She knew he had already been planning. Vincent's eyes were sharp, cutting like blades. It's time to end this. I've been too soft. And the cost has been the lives of loyal people. Ronnie wants to rewrite the past. He will face the full consequences. This time, there will be no forgiveness. Vincent didn't call it war, but Rachel knew that's exactly what it was. He began to move like a general, summoning his most trusted allies, redistributing power, and fortifying defenses around the estate and the hospital where Eleanor was recovering. Family business locations were locked down and evacuated, like a serpent retracting its tail before striking. Meanwhile, Ronnie's old operatives were systematically rounded up through coordinated investigations. Vincent's face appeared in no media, no official report. Yet everyone understood he was striking back. The decisive night took place in an old warehouse on the city's West Harbor. Ronnie had called a meeting with key figures from the underworld, confident in his impending victory. What he didn't know was that Vincent had planted insiders months before. The moment Ronnie stepped into the city, just as he raised a glass to toast, the lights went out. When they flickered back on, his men were disarmed. Subdued. And Vincent stood in the center. He had no large entourage, only 3 companions, but his gaze alone silenced the room. He didn't shout or threaten, he spoke simply. 10 years ago, I let you live. That was mercy. Today, I've come to reclaim what you lost respect. Ronnie struggled, but he knew he was beaten. Those who had pledged loyalty to him now turned away. Some were arrested on the spot by special forces pre-coordinated for the operation. Ronnie was taken away quietly. No gunfire, no blood. Yet the ending was far more painful than death: the loss of reputation, the loss of power, and, most importantly, the loss of any chance to rise again. The following morning, news of a large-scale organized crime sweep dominated headlines. Yet Vincent DeLuca's name was never mentioned. He returned to the estate like a man emerging from a painful operation. Rachel greeted him at the door, her eyes asking nothing, only offering silence and empathy. Vincent nodded softly, then whispered as though a 1,000-pound burden had lifted. It's over. You're safe. Eleanor's safe. The family is intact. Rachel didn't speak. She simply placed her hand on his shoulder, steady but gentle. In that thin morning light, for the first time, she saw Vincent not as the head of a powerful family, but as a man who had fought fiercely for the only thing truly worth risking everything for the people he loved. That spring, The garden behind the DeLuca estate burst into a riot of lavender, each cluster of deep purple flowers swaying gently in the early breeze, as if whispering quiet, profound secrets. Rachel stood by the living room window, a warm cup of tea in hand, her gaze drifting across the lush rows of greenery. For the first time in years, she no longer felt like an outsider. Everything had changed. She was no longer the solitary delivery girl wandering a cold, indifferent city. She had a home, a place to return to, a reason to rise each morning, and a circle of people bound not by blood, but by genuine love and loyalty. Eleanor's recovery progressed steadily. Each morning, she joined Rachel at breakfast, sharing old stories and smiling with warmth that lit her eyes. Vincent, too, was no longer the distant, intimidating figure she had once feared. Now, he was someone she trusted implicitly, someone who, without words, understood the shared journey they had endured to arrive at this day. Rachel herself began learning more about medicine and advanced healthcare, not merely for her work, but as a way to transform her kindness into something that could extend to others. For the first time in her life, she no longer feared the future. On the contrary, she awaited it. Rachel's story invites us to consider what truly makes a family. Is it blood, legal documents, or the choices we make each day to stay by one another's side? To love and protect without obligation, Rachel chose to stay when she could have walked away. Vincent chose to protect when he could have turned away, and Eleanor chose to call her family, not out of duty, but because of the heart. This story is more than a dramatic journey through good and evil. Between shadowed forces and rare human kindness, it is a profound reminder that sometimes the smallest, seemingly random moments open doors to an entirely new life. A single act of kindness, a courage ou décision, a timely handhold can be the beginning of unforeseen change. In a world where people often live hurried lives, love fast, and abandon easily, Rachel's story is proof that goodness endures, and that no matter how dark the past, everyone deserves the chance to begin again. What matters is having the courage to choose what is right, even when danger is certain and rewards are not. If this story touches something deep in your heart, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think of Rachel's journey in real life? Have you ever found yourself in her shoes feeling lost, being chosen, or courageously standing for the light? We would love to hear your sincere reflections, because it is your engagement that inspires us to continue sharing stories like this. And if you want to follow more moving, dramatic, and heartfelt tales about human connection, family, and unexpected bonds in the shadows, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share the YouTube channel Underworld Love Stories so we can explore more captivating videos together each day. Thank you for taking the time to hear this story. We wish you and your loved ones health, peace, happiness, and good fortune. See you in the next video. Goodbye, and have a warm, beautiful day.